Imagine holding a heavy bronze sword. You strike a solid block of granite. The bronze blade shatters into pieces. This was the hard limit of the ancient world. Bronze is simply too soft for heavy labor. It bends and dulls under constant stress. To build the modern world, you need steel. Steel is strong, flexible, and holds an edge. Yet the journey to steel starts with simple dirt. You do not need a modern iron mine. You only need red clay. Red clay is one of the most common soils on Earth. It covers hills, valleys, and riverbanks. This sticky mud contains the raw ingredients of skyscrapers. The red color comes from iron oxides. Iron oxide is simply rust. It is iron bound to oxygen. Your first challenge is separating this rust from the clay particles. Clay consists of tiny silicate particles. These silicate particles are extremely light. The iron oxide minerals are much heavier. You can use gravity to separate them. First, you dig up a large pile of red clay. You dump the clay into a deep pit. You add clean water and stir. You mix the slurry until it becomes a thin liquid. The heavy iron minerals sink quickly to the bottom. The light clay particles stay suspended in the water. You carefully pour off the muddy water. At the bottom of the pit, a dark sediment remains. This sediment is heavy and gritty. It is concentrated iron ore. You repeat this washing process 3 times. Each wash removes more clay. Finally, you collect the wet sediment. You spread it out to dry in the sun. The dry cake must now be roasted. You build a large wood fire. You pile the dried iron minerals on top. You burn the pile for 6 hours. The heat drives out chemically bound water. It also burns away organic impurities. The minerals oxidize further under the heat. They turn into a bright red powder. This powder is pure hematite, but you cannot put powder into a furnace. The draft would blow it away. It would also choke the fire. You must make solid chunks. You mix the red powder with water. You roll the damp paste into small balls. Each ball is about the size of a walnut. You fire these balls in a hot kiln. They bake until they are hard. Now you have iron ore pellets. They are porous but strong. Next, you must extract the metallic iron. This requires stripping the oxygen from the hematite. You need a chemical reduction. You build a bloomery furnace from the same red clay. The furnace is a hollow cylinder. It stands about 1 meter tall. The walls are thick to trap the heat. At the bottom, you leave a small opening. You insert a clay pipe called a toya. You connect bellows to this pipe. The bellows will pump air into the fire. You fill the furnace with charcoal. Charcoal is almost pure carbon. It burns hot and clean. You light the fire from the bottom. You pump the bellows steadily. Once the furnace is hot, you add ingredients. You add a layer of charcoal. Then you add a layer of iron ore pellets. You repeat this stacking process. Inside the furnace, a critical chemical reaction begins. The charcoal burns in a restricted air supply. This creates carbon monoxide gas. Carbon monoxide is hungry for oxygen. It flows upward through the hot ore pellets. It reacts with the iron oxide. The carbon monoxide steals the oxygen. This leaves behind metallic iron. The carbon monoxide becomes carbon dioxide. This gas escapes out the top. The furnace must stay hot. The temperature reaches about 1200 degrees Celsius. This is below the melting point of pure iron. Pure iron melts at 1538 degrees Celsius. Because the iron does not melt, it does not pool. Instead, tiny metallic grains sink slowly. They gather at the bottom of the furnace. They fuse together into a spongy mass. This mass is called a bloom. The bloom contains trapped impurities. These impurities are silicate slag. Slag is essentially liquid glass. It melts at the furnace temperature. It coats the iron grains. After 5 hours, you must harvest the bloom. You break open the bottom of the clay furnace. You pull out the glowing mass. It is white hot and dripping. It is a mixture of iron and slag. You place it on a large stone anvil. You must work quickly before it cools. You strike it with a heavy hammer. Each blow squeezes out the liquid slag. The slag sparks and squirts away. This process is consolidation. You flatten the bloom into a bar. You fold the bar over itself. You heat it again in the forge. You hammer it flat once more. You repeat this fold and weld cycle. This pushes out the remaining slag. It also aligns the iron crystals. The result is wrought iron. Wrought iron is tough and fibrous, but it is not steel. Wrought iron contains almost no carbon. Without carbon, the iron is soft. It cannot hold a sharp edge. To make steel, you must add carbon. You need between 0.2 and 2% carbon. This is a tiny amount, but it changes the metal completely. You put the iron bar back in the forge. You pack charcoal tightly around it. You seal the container to exclude air. You heat the assembly for 8 hours. Carbon atoms from the charcoal migrate. They dissolve into the solid iron. This process is carburization. The iron becomes steel, but the steel is still soft. You must change its crystal structure. You heat the steel to a cherry red. This is about 800 degrees Celsius. At this heat, the iron atoms rearrange. They form a face-centered cubic lattice. This structure is austenite. It holds the carbon atoms inside. You plunge the hot steel into cold water. This is quenching. The rapid cooling traps the carbon. The iron atoms cannot return to their normal shape. They form a distorted, needle-like structure. This structure is martensite. Martensite is extremely hard. It can scratch glass, but it is also very brittle. If you drop it, it will shatter. You must temper the steel. You heat the quenched steel gently. You heat it to about 250 degrees. This heat releases some internal stress. It allows a tiny amount of carbon to escape. The metal becomes tough. It can now bend without breaking. It will hold a razor-sharp edge. You have successfully forged steel. This simple recipe built civilization. For thousands of years, humans used this method. They forged nails, axes, and swords. Eventually, the process scaled up. We built blast furnaces and Bessemer converters. We produced steel by the million tons. We laid down thousands of miles of track. We erected the skeletons of modern cities. We created engines that crossed oceans. Today, steel is the backbone of global industry. It supports every skyscraper and highway. Yet the technology remains unchanged in spirit. It is the extraction of iron from clay. It is the careful control of carbon. The greatest monuments of engineering are just refined soil. If you appreciate the ingenuity of the past, subscribe to see what we build next.